I try to think of not only land grabbing but water grabbing, and how and when it is done in the name of conservation or climate change or these green imperatives. And that has led me into thinking about dispossession and how do we talk about dispossession? How are the connections between dispossession and alienation? How do we think about dispossession in a way that it is a process and not an event? I'm thinking about the concrete case of Montes de Maria in Colombia and how dispossession is negotiated day by day. For example, accessing to water has to do whether if the person in charge of the irrigation system wants you to have your gallon of water today or not. So you have to ask a favor. So how that is negotiated like day by day.
Our work at Corner House is not so much based on, what issues we're interested in. It's by being involved with different movements and different groups and people that we develop loyalties to or that we develop connections with. And that can, in terms of issues, that can lead in all kinds of different directions at the same time.
And are you seeing new things coming up, or is it just, the same old stuff dressed in new language?
I suppose the older we get and the more experience we have, we do realize that there's always a value in going back to fundamental processes of the exploitation of labor, the seizure of land, the collection of rent on land, finance and interest, and serious activists can actually avoid coming to grips with those, so to speak, old issues because they're still around today. But at the same time, everything's always in a new guise, and that requires, stretching yourself and stretching the experience and the writing of people who've dealt with these issues in the past to try to find out what is new here, what is old here, and how do we deal with the transformations that are taking place.
I found a lot of value in understanding ethnographically how, in this case, capitalism works in order to enclose these commons, in order to privatize access to water, to land, other resources. So I agree with you that is a lot of what we have to do.
There's always new things under the sun in terms of how to contest the forces of expropriation and exploitation.
One of the forms that state violence happens and materializes is by the power of classifying people. And in Colombia, it's very interesting that peasants are not indigenous. They are completely two different groups, and they are put to fight each other in many ways.
The most valuable way of talking about population is talking about it as one component of a larger strategy of capital and a larger strategy often of the state to be able to carry out the continued exploitation, the continued expropriation of people. And that's why it's important to talk about population not only in the context of some kind of academic theory which comes down through economics from Malthus, but also to connect it with, for example, climate change, the way the whole population discourse has influenced the very science of climate change, the way climate change is conceptualized, and the way that even the science of climate change distracts us from the real issue.
When we talk about population and overpopulation in particular, it becomes like a very rational and natural even explanation of the many environmental crises. So it has a tremendous depoliticizing power. I feel like it neutralizes things that cannot be neutral by any means. So I agree with you that we need to keep making those connections so people don't forget that we're talking about how some communities are turned into lives that don't matter, that are disposable, that are not grievable. We need to show that and show how this is connected to all of these different panics, the panic of climate catastrophe, the panic of immigrants, the panic of this, this poor third world woman who's having too many kids.
Do you think that part of the power of the population discourse is it so easily leads to these conceptions of apocalypse and catastrophe and crisis and explosion?
Fear is an easy way to manifest those anxieties, and then mobilizing fear is very powerful. We need to keep talking about why these things are urgent, how we cannot, not speak about environmental degradation, destruction, but at the same time to keep like a bit of perspective and know that all those apocalyptic narratives kind of play against our own interests.
Capitalism has a long history of using war as a way, or the threat of war as a way of terrorizing people, terrorizing workers that are threatening to become a little bit too unruly. The people that I work with and trust, when they hear the overpopulation excuse, their instinctive reaction is this is wrong. There's something wrong with this. We will not use this. On the other hand, there are a lot of other people. Their instinctive reaction is, this is the issue. It's the elephant in the room. We can't get away from population. I'm not always able to analyze that or argue against that, but I feel immediately these are not the people I want to work with. Start with what exists. Start with the feeling of so many people that there's something wrong here, and work together to put some history and context and theory around that will help to make the movement even stronger.
I would only add that the population discourse is also anti-environmental. That is not only anti-social, is not only pro-injustice, but it is also not serving the purposes of environmental causes. Not at all. Like if we think that population is the problem, it's because we're not seeing that scarcity is socially produced, that drought, hunger, erosion, all of these things that we tend to naturalize and to assume that come from from above, from this nature power, are politically produced. Like if we're interested in conservation, if we're interested in less consumption, less destruction, we need to talk about how capitalism does not sustain life. It has proved us again and again that it is incompatible with life, sustainable.
Over the last 200 years, what we've seen is that one person comes along and points out, okay, the overpopulation discourse is not scientific, it's anti-environmental. They come back again, the people who are defending the overpopulation discourse come back again and say, but no, you're being unscientific. No, we're not being unscientific. This is what, no, you're being unscientific. And it just goes around, and it's been going around and around for 200 years. For me, one of the tasks is to allow myself to learn from people who don't think in terms of adaptation and mitigation, and to find those people and have a discussion with them.
We should also speak about Anthropocene, like this new word for saying climate change or for lumping together all this climate crisis, but also how the Anthropocene, while it could open some political doors for discussion, at the same time goes back to this idea that this society is all the same, that you can put together all of these different causes and just name them the Anthropocene. It potentially hides so many things.
One of the counterparts to this whole Anthropocene discourse is actually geoengineering, because the idea is that you have these two blocks. You have society, the anthropos on one hand, and you have the climate on the other hand, and somehow the challenge becomes, how do we balance these two sort of big lumps with each other?
Like I find all this very frustrating, I feel, but at the same time I find the inspiration right with what people do, how they manage to move on, to put food on the table, and how they manage to get access to water despite having everything against them, and how they manage to grow things on soil that has been poisoned in many ways, but still they managed to resist all of these dynamics. So I agree that we should be looking closer to all those initiatives.